The whisper of that question drifts like dust across the void, soft and slow, settling gently into the quiet corners of the mind. And as that whisper grows faint, another sound swells behind it, a distant hum, an echo of something ancient, older than planets, older than the stars that cradle them. It is the sound of humanity's footsteps, echoing through the corridors of eternity. To follow mankind's story in the Warhammer 40,000 universe is to slip into a dream that oscillates between brilliance and terror, hope and despair, triumph and ruin. It is a story that stretches across millennia, woven with triumphs so radiant they seem impossible, and tragedies so crushing they echo like wounds carved into the bones of time. Yet tonight, this story will be told gently, softly, as though guiding your consciousness along the steady current of a river. A current that carries you from the first flicker of humanity's existence into the grand, shadowed future where the galaxy trembles under its name. Before humanity became the architect of empires and the keeper of impossible dreams, it was simply a species searching for warmth in the cold cradle of Earth. Its earliest steps were small, uncertain, fragile, yet each one carried the spark that would someday blaze into a force capable of shaping the stars themselves. From primitive minds staring up at unfamiliar constellations, to the first sparks of culture and thought, humanity began with questions long before it found answers. Questions about existence, about purpose, about the shimmering lights in the night sky that beckoned with silent promises. Earth was not always a world of steel and megacities. Once, it was soil and stone, oceans rolling in slow rhythm, and winds whispering across untouched plains. In those early ages, humanity learned to struggle, to endure. It learned that survival was not granted, it was earned, shaped by effort, sharpened by adversity. And yet even then, hidden behind the veil of developing consciousness, something extraordinary stirred, the first faint, unconscious flickers of psychic potential. Tiny, barely perceptible glimmers of the immense power that would one day define the species and ignite both its greatest achievements and its catastrophic woes. As humanity evolved, a strange pattern emerged, an instinctive reaching forward, as though drawn toward a destination it could not yet name. Its mind expanded, layer by layer, stretching toward understanding. Fire became tool, tools became machines, thought became philosophy. Conflict became civilization. Across deserts, forests, mountains, and oceans, humanity grew restless. It always sought more knowledge, more progress, more meaning. And all the while, the stars above remained patient, waiting for humanity to become courageous enough to touch them. Civilizations rose and fell on Earth like breaths, ancient kingdoms lost to time, empires that once believed themselves eternal, cultures whose stories melted into myth. But even as ages crumbled, humanity's momentum did not fade. It endured ice ages, droughts, wars, plagues, and catastrophes, each challenge shaping it into something stronger, something resilient, something capable of weathering storms far more terrifying than any the early world could conjure. There was a quiet inevitability to its progress. Every discovery, electricity, medicine, mathematics, industry, was like a step on a cosmic staircase, leading toward a horizon humanity could not yet see. Even as individuals lived and died in the blink of cosmic time, the species as a whole continued its steady ascent. Someday, the stars would no longer be tiny lights in the night sky. Someday, they would be destinations. But the galaxy was not silent during these primitive ages. Far beyond Earth, ancient empires clashed, rose, collapsed, and left behind ruins of immeasurable power. And woven into this cosmic backdrop was something even more ancient, something watching humanity with a subtle, inscrutable interest. For in the warp, the great psychic ocean of emotion and thought, humanity's growth was not unnoticed. Each fear, each hope, each triumph and tragedy rippled across that immaterial sea, awakening forces that would one day shape the species' destiny in ways it could never anticipate. Yet humanity remained blissfully unaware. It lived, it suffered, it dreamed, and it climbed, never knowing that its faint psychic glow was already attracting attention from powers that slumbered behind reality. Powers waiting for the right moment to whisper back. As the centuries passed, mankind began to reshape the Earth into something new, a world of expanding cities, rising technologies, and ambitions that stretched toward the heavens. The dream of reaching the stars transformed from myth into science, from imagination into engineering. Humanity looked upward not with fear, but with determination. It believed the universe was a frontier waiting to be explored, a puzzle waiting to be solved. And in quiet corners of laboratories, in the minds of scientists, thinkers, and dreamers, humanity began creating the tools that would one day carry it beyond its cradle. Engines capable of piercing the void. Theories that bent the boundaries of time and space. Machines that hinted at the dawn of a new age. Humanity stood at the threshold of destiny, unaware that every step forward brought it closer to both unimaginable glory and indescribable doom. For in the vastness of space, ancient eyes were beginning to open. And humanity's long journey, its triumphs, its arrogance, its brilliance, its failures, was only just beginning. Because in the long, dreamlike timeline of humanity's rise, there came a moment so subtle, so easily overlooked, that most of mankind never realized how deeply it would change everything. A moment when evolution did not simply move forward, it jumped. A moment when humanity's hidden potential finally cracked open, just enough to let the first golden spark of power shape what would become its greatest strength, and its greatest curse. Before we dive deeper into the true birth of humanity's dominion among the stars, here's your reward for staying with this story until the end. You will understand the entire chain of events, all the quiet beginnings, the hidden forces, the ancient shadows, that shaped mankind long before the Imperium ever existed. By the time this video ends, you won't just know the history, you will feel it. Like a slow burning fire warming the edges of your mind. But to earn that clarity, we must first drift into an era long before spaceships, long before technology, long before humanity even understood what it was becoming. Because something extraordinary was stirring beneath the surface of ordinary life on ancient Earth. Something psychic, something powerful, something that hummed quietly inside the emotional core of every man, woman, and child. It began as intuition, an uneasy sense of danger before danger arrived. A mother waking moments before her infant cried. A hunter sensing movement in the brush before the animal appeared. Small things, fragile things. Ripples, not waves. But every ripple is a sign that something is moving beneath deep waters. Over thousands of years, these faint psychic flickers intensified. Humanity's emotions, its anger, fear, love, longing, declared themselves in the warp with growing strength. Each passing century added new layers to this psychic signature, shaping a collective presence that pulsed against the fabric of reality. Humanity didn't recognize this growing power, but the warp did. And, while the warp remained silent, it was no longer indifferent. What humanity felt as instinct was, in truth, the earliest whisper of a destiny no other species would mirror. A destiny that would lead to the birth of the most powerful psychic being the galaxy would ever know, but we are not there yet. For now, we simply follow the steady rise of mankind's mind, a rise that began with dreams. Ancient humans dreamed of things impossible, lights in the sky, beings of fire, warnings carried on wings made of darkness. Their dreams were not random. They were reflections, distorted, yes, but unmistakably real, of the warp watching back. Humanity's emotional turbulence became a language, and through that language, something old and formless began to take interest. Yet life on Earth continued in its gentle, struggling rhythm. Tribes became clans. Clans became societies. Societies bloomed into civilizations that carved their stories into stone, painted their beliefs on walls, whispered their myths to children as they drifted into sleep. Unaware that the warp listened, absorbed, and responded in echoes. It would be millions of years before humanity learned the truth. That every hope it nurtured, every fear it buried, every joy it celebrated, every sorrow it mourned, became fuel for powers beyond physical comprehension. For now, we simply linger in this quiet era, this time when mankind's mind was awakening like a child opening its eyes for the first time, unaware of the vastness around it. A child destined to grow into a titan. And as humanity continued to evolve, as thought sharpened and societies expanded, the psychic spark grew with them. Slowly, inevitably, quietly shaping the foundation of what would one day become the greatest empire in the galaxy. But as with all rising lights, the darkness noticed. And it waited. Long before empires rose, before science blossomed, before the first sparks of starflight flickered into possibility, humanity lived under a sky far more dangerous than it appeared. And in that darkness above, silent watchers observed the species with a mix of curiosity, caution, and ancient memory. As humanity grew more complex, its psychic presence grew as well. What began as faint emotional echoes became stronger currents, washing through the warp like whispers carried on a restless tide. The warp listened, stirred, and sometimes answered, though humanity was too primitive to notice those subtle answers. Strange coincidences, prophetic dreams, flashes of insight, all were gentle signs that the boundary between thought and reality was thinner than anyone realized. Yet the universe beyond Earth was anything but peaceful. Long before humans understood the stars had already witnessed the ruin of civilizations far older and far grander. The galaxy was littered with the remnants of ancient empires, species who had risen to staggering heights only to fall into silence. Some vanished because of their own arrogance. Others were consumed by enemies. And some simply could not survive the ever-shifting storm of the warp. The first great galactic war, long forgotten by the time humanity looked upward, had scarred reality itself. Eldar gods, Necron star dynasties, Old Ones, Catan, and countless other forgotten powers had once clashed in a conflict so vast and violent that space-time still trembled from its echoes. Though millions of years had passed since that age of monsters, the wounds they left behind never truly healed. And into this wounded galaxy, humanity quietly grew. It was not special. It was not powerful. It was not even noticeable. But it was persistent. Every century brought new changes, subtle improvements in reasoning, language, structure, and thought. Humanity learned to store knowledge, to build communities, to challenge its surroundings. With each new discovery, its collective confidence expanded. But confidence is a delicate thing. It shines brightest just before the shadows remind it of its fragility. Through famine and war, through the rise of civilizations and the collapse of kingdoms, humanity unknowingly prepared itself for a far more complicated destiny. It developed ingenuity because it had to. It developed empathy because survival demanded cooperation. And slowly, very slowly, the psychic spark continued to brighten within every beating heart. Still, the watchers in the warp remained silent. They understood something humanity did not, that a psychic species must grow carefully, or risk tearing itself apart before it ever discovers its potential. Too much power too early would mean madness, chaos, destruction. The warp could amplify brilliance or insanity, and without the wisdom to wield that power, a species could easily devour itself. So humanity evolved at its own pace. Step by step, generation by generation, its mind strengthened, its emotions deepened, its imagination soared, and the warp, though always dangerous, remained mostly still, disturbed only by the softer waves of human thought. But as humanity approached the edge of true civilization, writing, agriculture, early cities, an invisible tension grew. The first faint flickers of true psychic awakening appeared in isolated individuals. Shamans, seers, prophets. They spoke of visions no one else understood, dreams too vivid to ignore, premonitions that came to pass with eerie accuracy. These early psychics did not realize their visions were glimpses into the immaterial. They believed themselves gifted, cursed, or touched by divine forces. But in truth, they were simply hearing the faint murmurs of the warp, murmurs that would become screams in later ages. The warp was watching. Humanity was changing, and the galaxy, wounded and ancient, sensed something approaching. Every species that had survived the long ages knew one truth. In the darkness of the future, nothing remains quiet forever. Humanity was not yet ready for what awaited it. But destiny does not ask for readiness. It merely arrives. And the first great turning point was closer than anyone could imagine. Those strange figures scattered across prehistoric tribes, the ones people later called shamans, seers, spirit talkers, dream walkers, were far more than simple storytellers or spiritual guides. They were the first human beings to brush against the warp with conscious minds, long before anyone understood what the warp actually was. As civilizations slowly formed from scattered tribes, these shamans began noticing the same unsettling truth. They shared visions. Night after night, they dreamed identical dreams, storms of fire, oceans of blood, shadows rising from the horizon, and a golden light pushing back the darkness. They dreamed of worlds they had never seen and beings they could not describe. And while most of humanity lived in ignorance of the immaterial realm, these individuals were awake to it. The shamans guided their people not because they claimed power, but because people sensed something different about them. They spoke with a calm certainty that eased fears during harsh winters, led migrations across vast lands, and warned of dangers long before they arrived. But the truth was far darker. They had glimpsed the warp, and something in the warp had glimpsed them. At first, their abilities brought unity. Tribes thrived under the guidance of these strange, wise leaders who seemed capable of reading fate like a scroll. But as generations passed, the number of shamans grew, and so did their strength. Their visions sharpened, their influence expanded, and something inevitable happened. The warp began to respond more intensely to their consciousness. Every prophecy was a ripple. Every healing ritual was a disturbance. Every shared dream was a flare in the immaterial sea. And the warp noticed. The entities within it, half-formed, chaotic, hungry beings of raw emotion, began drifting closer. The shamans sensed these presences like cold breaths against the back of their minds. Some dismissed it, others shuddered. But the oldest among them, the ones who had survived decades of psychic awakening, understood that they were being hunted. For the warp is not a peaceful ocean, it is a storm. And once the storm notices a spark, it seeks to consume it. Shamans began dying in strange and terrifying ways. Some vanished during trance-like states. Others awoke screaming, their minds fractured beyond repair. A few simply crumbled to dust, victims of warp predators drawn to their growing strength. The survivors grew desperate. They knew that the warp no longer saw them as distant curiosities, it saw them as prey. Driven by fear and guided by instinct, the shamans formed a secret conclave. They traveled across continents to gather in an ancient, hidden place. They were the most powerful psychic humans alive, and they understood that their species stood at a crossroads. If humanity continued to grow psychically without guidance, it would be devoured before it even reached its first golden age. After long debate, they agreed on one unthinkable solution. To save the species, they would sacrifice themselves. Not in despair, but in transformation. The shamans had discovered something extraordinary. If a psychic soul was strong enough, it could choose not to scatter upon death. Instead, it could remain in the warp as a coherent entity, avoiding dissolution. If thousands of shamans died at the exact same moment, by their own will, their collective souls might merge into a single being, greater than any individual mind. A guardian, a protector, a psychic titan capable of shielding humanity from the horrors lurking in the warp. It was the most selfless act in the history of mankind. Over one night, under a sky that seemed to tremble with unseen anticipation, the shamans gathered in a great circle. They performed their final ritual, drawing their minds into harmony. And then, in a single, silent moment, they let go of life. Their bodies fell, their souls rose, and their essence fused into something new, something incomprehensibly powerful. A consciousness formed in the warp, radiant and vast. A mind unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. A being forged from sacrifice, intention, and purpose. The first spark of a golden light. The first breath of a guardian. The first moment of a being who would one day walk the earth in human flesh. This was the moment the Emperor of mankind began to exist. Not yet born, but awakened. The galaxy shifted. Humanity's future tilted toward destiny. And the warp, for the first time in ages, felt fear. The entity that would one day be known as the Emperor did not appear suddenly, like a bolt of lightning tearing through the night. He formed slowly, an immense psychic presence gathering itself within the warp, coalescing from the united souls of thousands of shamans who had willingly given their lives to protect humanity. For a long time, this consciousness simply existed. It drifted in the immaterial ocean, learning the movements of its currents, studying the patterns of emotion that shaped its tides, sensing the predators that stalked its depths. It learned to hide, to weave its immense presence into the warp so subtly that even the hungriest entities could not find it. It learned patience, a trait the shamans had carried throughout their mortal lives, now magnified 1,000-fold. And then, slowly, this vast consciousness turned its attention toward the physical world, toward Earth, toward the fragile species whose survival it had been created to ensure. It observed their evolution with a quiet, enduring curiosity. It felt every wave of emotion that pulsed through their growing societies. It sensed their fears, their hopes, their innovations, their tragedies. It understood that humanity was rising faster now, guided unconsciously by the faint psychic refuge it offered. And eventually, after centuries of watching, learning, and preparing, the being made a decision. It would enter the physical realm. Not as a god, not as a ruler, not yet, but as a silent guardian among the people it had sworn to protect. He was born in ancient Anatolia, around the 8th millennium BCE, to a simple human mother and father who never realized the magnitude of the child they held. He appeared normal, just another infant in a world still learning how to build cities and tame rivers. But behind his eyes burned an ancient intelligence, deeper than language, older than civilization. From his very first moments, he remembered everything. He remembered the shamans. He remembered the sacrifice. He remembered the warp. He remembered purpose. He grew through childhood not as a prodigy, but as an observer. He spoke little. He listened much. He watched humanity with the same quiet curiosity that had guided him for centuries. And as the years passed, he began to intervene, not with displays of power, but with gentle corrections. A single conversation with a chieftain that prevented a needless war. A nudge to an inventor whose ideas would someday influence entire cultures. A healing touch offered in secret to someone whose life would ripple outward in ways even the Emperor found beautiful. He was subtle, invisible, a whisper in the right direction. For thousands of years, he walked among humanity in this same quiet way. He lived dozens of lives, each time adopting a new identity, a new role. A philosopher in one age. A healer in another. A statesman, a scholar, a strategist. Rarely did he reveal his full abilities, for his purpose was not to dominate but to guide. Humanity was still fragile, still learning, still struggling. And he knew that guiding them too directly would be like placing a torch in the hands of a child, inspiring but dangerous. Yet as centuries passed, he noticed a troubling pattern. Humanity did not simply evolve. It reached, at an accelerating pace. Empires grew faster. Technologies advanced more rapidly. Cultural complexity exploded. Human ambition soared. And beneath all of this, the psychic spark continued to brighten. Humanity's presence in the warp became stronger, louder, impossible to ignore. The warp stirred again, but this time, not with curiosity. With hunger. Demons, entities, warp beasts, creatures drawn to emotion and thought, drifted closer. They brushed against the edge of reality, sensing that humanity was becoming a feast worth hunting. The Emperor felt their pressure like cold fingers tapping against the walls of the material world. He realized something with perfect clarity. He could no longer remain in the shadows. If humanity was to survive what was coming, its rapid growth, its growing psychic resonance, the ancient dangers lurking in the warp, he would eventually have to stand at its forefront. Not yet, not immediately, but someday soon, for the shadows were growing longer. Humanity was entering a new era, and the warp was beginning to thin. But even the Emperor, vast and timeless as he was, could not predict what humanity was about to unleash upon the galaxy, or upon itself. The first age of pure enlightenment was ending, and the golden path ahead would be far darker than anyone imagined. To stretch beyond its cradle, beyond the rivers, plains, and mountains it has always known, and set its gaze upon infinite darkness. Humanity, under the subtle guidance of the Emperor, was about to take that step. Slowly, carefully, the first true empires began to form, not just on Earth, but across the nascent reaches of space. For millennia, humanity had built kingdoms, nations, and civilizations. Now, driven by the spark of ambition that the Emperor had nurtured quietly, it began constructing vessels to leave the planet. Early explorers, unaware of the magnitude of what they were doing, ventured farther than any humans before them, crossing empty voids between nearby planets, testing the fragile limits of science and endurance. Each success brought confidence. Each failure taught lessons that no book could contain. And yet, while humanity expanded outward, the galaxy remained scarred by older wars. Ruins of ancient civilizations, strange machines whose creators had long vanished, and hidden worlds with dangerous secrets lay waiting for explorers who were unaware of the legacy they were disturbing. The Emperor watched. He observed every misstep and subtle victory, guiding just enough to prevent catastrophe, yet allowing humanity to grow on its own terms. The Age of Empires was not marked by peace. It was defined by struggle. Tribal rivalries that once existed on Earth now stretched across planets. Early colonies clashed over resources, over ideology, over survival itself. The Emperor remained a quiet shepherd, teaching humanity that unity was strength, yet never forcing it. He understood the value of resilience, the hardening of a species through conflict and trial. And all the while, the warp waited. Patience is a virtue of the immaterial, and the warp had had millennia to watch humanity evolve. Its hunger had not diminished. It had only grown more patient, more cunning. Humanity's expansion, its first reach for the stars, emitted a resonance that could be felt across light years. Other civilizations, few and ancient, noticed as well. Some sought to interfere. Others observed, curious or cautious, recognizing that a new power was rising. Through careful guidance, the Emperor began to unify disparate human factions. Science and technology advanced. Trade networks grew across star systems. Languages, cultures, and philosophies intermingled, creating a complex tapestry of human civilization. The first interstellar governments began to form. And yet, as ambitious as humanity was, it was still fragile. Its reach exceeded its understanding. Its expansion created opportunity for both greatness and catastrophe. Among the scattered human colonies, there were whispers, tales of beings who seemed to appear and disappear at will, guiding those in need, protecting against disasters unseen. These whispers reached scholars and explorers, who often dismissed them as myth. Yet the stories were true. The Emperor, moving unseen, ensured that humanity survived the first subtle touches of danger in the void. And then the first true threat arrived. Not from human rivals, but from the remnants of older civilizations, the forgotten machines, the wandering predators, the ghostly echoes of species that had risen and fallen long before humanity existed. They struck without warning, targeting colonies ill-prepared for war. Worlds burned, populations vanished, and yet, in the chaos, the Emperor's subtle guidance ensured survival. He was the invisible hand that allowed humanity to endure and grow stronger, even when it did not know it needed saving. This was the first lesson of the stars. Humanity could reach outward, but the galaxy would test its resolve. For every gain, there would be danger. For every victory, there would be loss. And as human colonies multiplied, so did the resonance of their collective presence in the warp. Every success was a flare, every conflict a drumbeat, and somewhere, far beyond human perception, eyes began to focus on the rising power that dared to claim the stars. The Age of Empires was humanity's awakening, a time when it first realized it was more than just a fragile species on a fragile world. But the Emperor knew that these early triumphs were only preparation. Humanity's true challenge, the one that would define its entire future, was still to come. The galaxy was not merely a frontier. It was a crucible. And humanity, for all its brilliance, was about to be tested in ways that would echo for 10,000 generations. Humanity, having taken its first tentative steps into the stars, began to fracture. The very ambition that allowed it to expand became the seed of chaos. Communication between worlds faltered. Civilizations that once thrived under the quiet guidance of the Emperor now turned inward, vying for resources, power, and influence. This period, later known as the Age of Strife, was unlike anything humanity had faced before. It was not a single war or conflict, but a slow unweaving of stability, a collapse that came from within. Planetary governments fell into isolation. Star systems once connected by trade and knowledge cut themselves off. Without unity, technology stagnated or failed. Warp storms erupted across space, severing communication and travel. Entire human worlds became lost, marooned in darkness, left to survive as best they could. And yet, the warp did not merely disrupt humanity, it preyed upon it. Psychic disturbances intensified. Individuals with uncontrolled powers, long rare, now began to manifest unpredictably, sometimes violently. Entire planets witnessed spontaneous devastation, populations decimated by forces no one could comprehend. The Emperor watched from afar, unseen, as the consequences of unbridled human potential collided with the dangers of a universe that would not forgive weakness. During this age, humanity's resilience was tested like never before. Some worlds turned inward, embracing autocracy or fanaticism. Others fell to despair and anarchy. Some discovered the value of cooperation too late, learning from catastrophe what they should have known instinctively. It was a time of survival, not advancement, a time when the lessons of patience, unity, and careful growth became not just philosophy but necessity. Yet amid this chaos, faint sparks of hope persisted. On some worlds, human colonies learned to adapt, innovating in isolation. They developed technologies to stabilize warp storms, to protect against psychic anomalies, and to rebuild what had been lost. Even in isolation, humanity continued to grow stronger, silently proving the Emperor's guiding hand had not abandoned them. In the warp, it watched, calculating. Hungry entities sensed the chaos, eager to exploit the scattered populations. They whispered into minds, spreading fear, anger, and madness, drawing upon human suffering to increase their power. The galaxy had become a testing ground, a pressure chamber for a species on the edge of potential and extinction. It was during this time that the Emperor, long concealed among mortals, began preparing for the next phase of humanity's existence. He understood that mere survival was not enough. Humanity needed guidance, discipline, and unity. The scattered colonies, the struggling civilizations, the psychic flare-ups, they were all warning signs of a species on the verge of self-destruction. To endure, humanity would need leadership unlike anything it had ever known. And so, even as the Age of Strife brought devastation and despair, it also shaped the crucible in which the Emperor would forge the future. From the shadows, he observed, learned, and waited, allowing humanity to face its own limitations, to experience failure, and to prove that it could rise even from the ashes of its own collapse. The galaxy, violent and indifferent, had tested humanity, and found that it could endure. But endurance alone would not be enough to claim dominion over the stars. That task would require vision, will, and a force strong enough to unite billions of souls across thousands of worlds. Humanity had survived the first true trial of the cosmos. But the trials ahead would demand more than survival. They would demand the birth of a legend. The Age of Strife had tested humanity, scattered it, and left it fractured. But in the shadows, the Emperor of Mankind prepared to emerge, not as a silent observer, but as a leader, a unifier, and the guiding hand that would bring order to chaos. When the Emperor stepped forward, he did so with a purpose forged over millennia. He had witnessed the weaknesses and brilliance of humanity, seen the sparks of potential and the depths of folly. He knew the dangers that lurked in the warp and the galaxy beyond, and he understood that mere survival was insufficient. Humanity needed a vision, a structure, a plan to endure, and to thrive. The first challenge was unity. Scattered worlds, broken by warp storms and isolation, had developed independently, each believing in its own path. Some clung to superstition, others sought power through domination, and some had simply given up, surviving in isolation but forgetting their shared heritage. The Emperor moved quietly at first, guiding key figures, inspiring innovation, and planting seeds of leadership. He created alliances without revealing his presence, nudging humanity toward cooperation, toward purpose, toward destiny. And then, he began the Great Crusade, a campaign that would span centuries, a mission to reclaim lost worlds, reconnect scattered colonies, and bring humanity under a single banner. With unmatched intellect, foresight, and psychic might, he created a cadre of genetically enhanced warriors, the Primarchs, each designed to embody a facet of human potential. These warriors were not merely soldiers, they were symbols, catalysts for the rebirth of a fractured species. As the Emperor's vision unfolded, humanity began to rise once more. Worlds that had fallen into darkness were reclaimed. Knowledge long thought lost returned. Science, industry, and culture flourished under the guiding hand of the Emperor and his Primarchs. Humanity became a force that could shape the stars, no longer fragile or isolated, but coordinated, purposeful, and driven by a shared destiny. Yet even in this age of ascendance, danger lingered. The warp had grown restless. The entities that had observed humanity for millennia now saw the Emperor as a threat to their influence. They whispered, manipulated, and struck where they could, attempting to exploit weakness, incite rebellion, and unravel the fragile unity he had built. But the Emperor, prepared and patient, countered these threats with foresight and resolve. He knew that the path to greatness was never free from peril. Humanity's rise under the Emperor was not merely political or military. It was philosophical, spiritual, and psychic. He instilled a vision of purpose, of destiny, and of the potential for greatness inherent in every human being. He taught the value of unity over isolation, reason over superstition, and strength over fear. And in doing so, he transformed humanity from a species struggling for survival into an empire capable of spanning the galaxy. The galaxy itself seemed to acknowledge this shift. Once indifferent, the stars now watched humanity as something more than fragile life. They observed a species being guided by a mind greater than any they had yet seen, a mind capable of bending not just events, but the very course of history. And so, the Age of the Emperor began, a time of conquest, of expansion, of vision, and of preparation for challenges that would test the very soul of humanity. The scattered, fractured species of the Age of Strife was gone. In its place stood a force united, purposeful, and guided by the hand of a being whose patience had endured millennia. Humanity had survived chaos, weathered the storms of the warp, and faced the consequences of its own ambition. Now it was ready to rise as never before, and the galaxy, both mortal and immortal, would soon feel the weight of its presence. The Emperor of Mankind had spent millennia shaping humanity from the shadows, preparing it for the challenges of a galaxy rife with danger. Now, the moment had arrived to move beyond observation and subtle guidance. It was time for decisive action, a campaign that would unite the human race and establish its dominion among the stars. The Great Crusade was not merely a war. It was a rebirth, a reclamation of lost worlds, lost knowledge, and lost potential. Humanity, guided by the Emperor and his Primarchs, embarked on a mission to restore civilization to the scattered colonies that had been isolated during the Age of Strife. Every conquest, every alliance, every world brought under the Emperor's banner was a step toward unifying the species and reclaiming its destiny. The Emperor's strategy was flawless. His Primarchs, each designed with specific traits and abilities, led legions of space marines, superhuman warriors crafted to inspire and protect humanity. Together, they became instruments of both guidance and force, bringing order to worlds torn by chaos, ignorance, or conflict. No longer would humanity be fragmented, vulnerable to external threats or internal collapse. The galaxy would learn that mankind had a master, a guide, and a shield. Yet the Great Crusade was not without cost. Humanity's expansion revealed dangers that had lain dormant for millennia. Alien civilizations, once thought extinct, stirred in the shadows. Ancient machines awakened. Predatory forces in the warp, sensing the rising psychic presence of humanity, began to react with hostility. The Emperor faced the challenge of defending his people while simultaneously guiding them toward unity and strength, a delicate balance that required foresight, strategy, and immense patience. Through the campaigns of the Great Crusade, humanity not only reclaimed lost territories but also discovered the vast diversity of the galaxy. Every planet, every culture, every civilization encountered became a test of both compassion and judgment. The Emperor's guidance ensured that humanity did not merely conquer, but learned, adapted, and grew stronger from each encounter. Knowledge was preserved, culture was protected, life, wherever possible, was safeguarded. The Crusade was also a time of extraordinary innovation. Humanity's reach into the stars accelerated technological progress, creating vessels capable of traversing vast distances, communication networks linking countless worlds, and weapons powerful enough to challenge the most ancient adversaries. Civilization, once fractured, now moved as a single organism, coordinated under the Emperor's vision. Yet even in this era of triumph, a shadow loomed. The warp, patient and calculating, recognized that humanity's expansion threatened its dominion. It began to strike indirectly, seeding discord and temptation among humans themselves. Corruption crept into the hearts of men, ambitions clashed, and not all who served the Emperor remained loyal. The seeds of rebellion, the subtle influence of chaos, began to take root in ways even the Emperor had foreseen but could not entirely prevent. The Great Crusade was a triumph, yes, but it was also the prelude to one of humanity's darkest chapters. For every world brought into the light of unity, every mind enlightened, there were forces lurking, waiting for the right moment to undo it all. The galaxy was vast, full of both wonder and danger, and the Emperor understood that victory in the stars required vigilance, wisdom, and an unbreakable will. And so humanity surged forward, a unified force guided by a being who had waited millennia for this moment, ready to face the challenges of a galaxy that would never forgive weakness, and would never rest until it had tested every ounce of human resilience. For humanity, the Great Crusade marked the culmination of millennia of struggle, sacrifice, and quiet guidance. The scattered children of Earth had become a force capable of shaping the galaxy, yet the journey was far from over. The Emperor, timeless and all-seeing, understood that true survival required more than conquest. It demanded vigilance, wisdom, and the forging of a legacy that would endure through eternity. The galaxy, vast and indifferent, had not been silent. Alien powers watched from the shadows, ancient machines stirred from their slumber, and the warp simmered with hunger and malice. Humanity's psychic presence, now amplified by centuries of growth and unity, had not gone unnoticed. The trials ahead would test the species in ways that eclipsed every previous struggle.